Olivia Brooks came through the revolving doors at 8 in the morning, her heel sliding on the wet marble, the files scattered across the floor. Walter Hayes set down his mop and knelt to gather every page. She did not thank him. In front of 3 visiting partners, she said loudly, "People like you have no business standing in this lobby. Get out of my sight." Walter handed her the last page and lowered his head. Something crossed his face. Nobody in the lobby caught it. What was he hiding? The lobby emptied out by 8:30. The 3 partners went up to 14, with Olivia Brooks walking ahead of them, and Walter Hayes stayed behind with the mop and the wet marble and the yellow sign that said, "Caution." He set the sign back where it had been before she kicked it aside, then finished the floor. He worked from the far wall toward the doors the way he did every morning, because a man who works backward toward the exit never has to walk across what he just cleaned. Bernard Pruitt watched from the security desk. 19 years in that building had taught him how to see things without appearing to look. When Walter came past with the bucket, Bernard set down his coffee. "You didn't have to pick those up for her," Bernard said. "They were on my floor." "That's not what I meant." "I know what you meant." Walter kept walking. I was 46, and he had been at Sterling Group since the end of June. He came in at 5:30, took the freight elevator to 14, and worked his way down. His gray uniform shirt had his first name stitched over the pocket, and most of the people in that building had never once looked at the pocket. He was fine with that. He had not taken the job to be looked at. He had taken it because the rent was $1,300 a month, and a single father with no one else on the lease does not get to be particular about what pays it. There had been money once. He did not talk about it. The people who knew him now had no reason to think there had ever been anything else, and the people who had known him then had stopped calling a long time ago. He had learned that a life can turn on one bad quarter and one signature, and that afterward, the world simply files you somewhere else and moves on. He had made peace with the filing. What he had not made peace with was the way certain people read the file and decided it was the whole man. Olivia Brooks was one of those people. She was 29. She ran client relations on Fort, and she had gotten there fast enough to believe the speed itself was proof of something. She came in at 7:45 with an iced coffee she never finished and a phone she never put down. She spoke to the receptionist in one voice, to the partners in another, and to the cleaning staff in no voice at all, which was somehow worse. Walter had learned her rhythms in the first week. He knew to be out of the 14th floor corridor by 7:40, and he knew that if he was not, she would stop mid-call and stare until he moved, then go on talking as though she had swatted at a fly. He did not hate her for it, and that surprised him when he examined it. What he felt was closer to recognition. He had been in rooms where he himself had failed to see a person standing 3 feet away, holding a bucket. It is hard to stay angry at someone for a thing you once did without noticing. Gregory Simmons made it easier. Gregory was Olivia's account in every sense. He laughed a half second before her jokes landed, and a half second after they stopped being funny. And he had a habit of narrating Walter's presence out loud, to nobody in particular. "Careful, gentlemen. Maintenance is among us." He said it in a light voice with his hand on someone's shoulder, and the room would smile the way rooms do, and Walter would keep moving. Gregory never once said any of it when Olivia was not there to hear. The following Tuesday, the trouble started with a key card. The 14th floor had a coffee station near the copy room, and by 9 in the morning it looked like a small disaster. Walter came through at 9:15 to wipe the counter and clear the sink. There was a white plastic badge lying face down beside the machine, half under a stack of napkins, the corner of a lanyard sticking out. He turned it over. Olivia Brooks, Client Relations, Level 4 Access. I knew what it was worth. That was the first thing he thought. and he did not like that he thought it. The second thing he thought was that she would be looking for it, and the fastest way to return it was to walk it down to her office. He never got that far. "Put it down." She was standing at the mouth of the corridor with her coffee. Behind her, Gregory Simmons had stopped mid-sentence, and two younger analysts had come out of the copy room, because a voice at that pitch pulls people out of doorways. Walter turned with the badge flat on his open palm face up, so she could see it. "You left it by the machine," he said. "I was bringing it to you. You were bringing it to me." She repeated it slowly, the way a person repeats a thing they have already decided is a lie. She crossed the corridor and took the badge off his hand without touching him. "Level 4. Do you have any idea what's behind Level 4? "The file room," Walter said, "and the executive floor." Something shifted in her face, and he understood immediately that he had made a mistake. He knew the answer because the access map was pinned to the wall of the building manager's office, and he read it every morning before he took the freight elevator up, and because a man who cleans a place learns its map faster than a man who works in it. But to her in that corridor, a janitor who could name what was behind Level 4 was a janitor who had been thinking about it. "He knows the floors," Gregory said, and he laughed and looked at Olivia to see if it had landed. Olivia did not laugh. She held the badge up between two fingers, turned toward the analysts in the doorway, and raised her voice enough that it carried past the copy room into the open floor beyond. "Everybody take a look," she said. "This is why we lock our desks. I want everyone to understand that the man who empties your trash at 6 in the morning had my access card in his hand and was walking away with it." "I was walking toward your office," Walter said. "Your office is a supply closet on the 3rd floor. She said it evenly without heat, which was what made it land. "Don't tell me where you were walking." 15 people had filled the corridor by then, some standing, some half out of their chairs in the particular stillness of an office, watching something it will talk about at lunch. Walter felt the heat come up the back of his neck and let it come. There were sentences he could have said. He knew what a call to the 16th floor was worth, and he knew he was never going to make it, because the moment he did, the job ended. Not that day, but soon. In the quiet way these things end, with a phone call to the contractor and a different name on the schedule, and the job was $1,300 a month. The job was the medical premium. The job was the reason he could look at the envelopes on his kitchen counter without opening the drawer, where he kept the ones he had already stopped opening. "I'm sorry for the confusion," Walter said. "There's no confusion. There's a report I'm going to write, and there's you going back downstairs." I went back downstairs. He finished the 3rd floor, and the lobby restrooms, and the loading corridor behind the freight elevator. And at 11 o'clock, he sat on an overturned bucket in the supply room with the door open and did not eat the sandwich he had brought. That was where Bernard found him. Bernard leaned against the doorframe with his arms folded and looked at the shelving for a while before he said anything. "Word travels." "I imagine it does. For what it's worth, Denise at the front desk saw you come down that corridor with it face up in your hand." "Face up?" She said that specifically. A man stealing a badge doesn't carry it like a waiter carrying a check. Walter almost smiled. "Is Denise going to write that in a report?" "Denise is 24, and she needs the job," Bernard said, sitting down on a crate. "So no, she's not." "Then it isn't worth anything. It's worth that somebody saw it right." Bernard rubbed his thumb along the seam of his sleeve. 19 years in this building. I've watched 3 chief executives come and go. The ones on the way up never look down. Not once. It isn't that they decide you're beneath them. They genuinely do not see a person there. Miss Brooks isn't cruel. She's just never had a reason to look at the floor. That's a generous read. It's an accurate one. Cruelty takes effort. Bernard stood. What she did upstairs, though, that took effort. The report got written. Walter never saw it, but he knew the shape of it by Thursday, because the 11th floor supervisor came down to the supply room and asked him in the careful voice people use when they have been told to ask something, whether there had been an incident on 14. Walter said there had been a misunderstanding about a key card. The supervisor wrote nothing down, which was its own kind of answer, and told him to stay off 14. After 7:30. That was the part nobody upstairs would ever see. Not the corridor. The week afterward. The way a building rearranges itself around an accusation without anybody making a decision to do it. Two of the analysts who had stood in that doorway stopped saying good morning. The woman who ran the 11th floor mailroom, who had never spoken to him at all, started locking her cart when he passed. None of them were being cruel. They had heard a manager say a thing at volume in a hallway, and a manager saying a thing at volume is for most people indistinguishable from the thing being true. Walter did the floors. He did them well, because doing them badly would have been a way of agreeing with her. He also stopped eating lunch in the 3rd floor supply room with the door open and started eating it with the door shut, and he noticed himself doing it and did not like what it meant. That evening, Walter took the bus home and sat at the kitchen counter of the apartment he had moved into 14 months earlier and did the thing he did once a week. He laid the envelopes out in 2 rows. Row 1 was what had to be paid. Row 2 was what could wait one more cycle. Row 2 had gotten longer every month since March. He had $412 in checking and 11 days until the 15th. I thought about quitting. He thought about it seriously, the way a man does when the alternative has finally been priced out and found affordable. There was a warehouse off the interstate hiring at $15 an hour and a night shift at a distribution center, paying more than that. He could walk into the building manager's office at 5:30 the next morning, hand over the card and the shirt with his name stitched on the pocket, and never again stand in a corridor while a woman half his age explained to a crowd what he was. That was what it came down to. Not the money. The corridor. Then he thought about what leaving would actually mean, stripped of the satisfaction. It would mean Olivia Brooks went home that night, having told a story about a thief, and by Friday, the story would have hardened into something everyone on 14 simply knew, and the man in it would be gone and unable to be anything else. It would mean the last true thing about him in that building was a lie she had told in a hallway, and it would mean starting over at 46 with a gap on the application and a reference he could not use with the rent still due on the 1st. He turned the envelopes face down and squared the stack. Hein had believed one thing for most of his life, and he had gone on believing it through the years when it stopped paying him. A man is what he does when the doing goes unrecorded. Not what he says about himself. Not what a title says about him. Not what a room decides about him in the time it takes to cross it. He had run a company once on that belief, and he had lost the company, and he had never once concluded that the belief was the part that failed. So he was not going to walk out of a building because a woman had shouted at him in a corridor. He was going to stay and do the work and not argue about it, because arguing was only another way of asking permission to be seen. He would let it accumulate instead. Time and a record, and the arithmetic that eventually catches up to every story somebody tells about you in a hallway. I was in at 5:30 the next morning. He did 14 first, the way he always did. Olivia's desk lamp was still on from the night before, and there was a half-finished iced coffee sweating onto a client folder. He moved the cup, wiped the ring off the folder, and set the cup on the windowsill, where it could not do any more damage. Then he went and got the wastebaskets. At 6:40, Gregory Simmons came in early to prep something and found Walter in the corridor with the cart. There was nobody else on the floor, no audience, nothing to perform for. And for one moment, Gregory's face was completely blank, as if he could not remember which version of himself to load. "Morning," Walter said. Gregory nodded once, went into his office, and shut the door. Walter finished the corridor and took the freight elevator down. In the lobby, Bernard was hanging his jacket on the hook behind the desk. "You're still here," Bernard said. "Rent's still due." "That the only reason?" Walter pushed the cart toward the service door and stopped with his hand on the frame. Through the glass front of the building, the street was going gray toward morning. "No," he said, "but it's the one I'll say out loud." The badge story hardened by Friday, exactly the way Walter had known it would. Within a month, it had stopped being a story and become a piece of furniture. When a stapler went missing from the copy room, someone on 14 said the word maintenance, and the room laughed, and nobody checked the drawer where the stapler actually was. When a client folder turned up in the wrong cabinet, Gregory Simmons remarked that things had a way of moving around after 6 in the morning. He did not say a name. How he never needed to. Walter kept the schedule. 5:30 and 14, first then down. He stopped taking the corridor past Olivia's office after 7:40. Not because she had told him to, but because the aggravation was expensive and he had nothing to spend. He learned which people said good morning and which looked at their phones. And he learned that the second group was larger and that this said more about the building than about him. What he did not stop doing was the work behind the work. There was a Thursday in October when Sterling Group hosted the Ridgeway account for a full-day review, and the materials were laid out the night before in the 14th floor conference room. Walter came through at 5:40 and found the long table covered in loose paper. Somebody had carried 3 bound decks and at once dropped a stack near the door and left the pages fanned across the carpet and halfway under the credenza. It would have taken a person 30 seconds to see it and 40 minutes to fix it. He fixed it. He sat on the carpet in the dark with the overheads off and the hallway light coming through the glass, and he sorted 80-some pages by section header and page footer into 3 separate decks, squared them on the table, and set the covers on top. Then he ran the vacuum and left. At 9 o'clock, Olivia Brooks walked into that room ahead of 4 men from Ridgeway, and never knew there had been anything wrong. She would not have known about the other thing either. The other thing was the revenue schedule. Walter had been emptying the bin under the printer at 6 in the morning. When the machine jammed and spat 2 pages face up into the tray, and one of them was a quarterly summary with Olivia's initials in the corner. He was not looking for it. He glanced at it. The way anyone glances at paper in their hand, and the number in the 3rd column stopped him. The figure in that column was identical to the figure 2 columns over. Someone had pulled the wrong quarter forward. The way it happens when a summary gets built in a hurry from a source file with 2 tabs, named almost the same thing. It would not have shown up in a spell check. It would have shown up 11 minutes into the Ridgeway meeting when one of those 4 men ran his finger down the column and asked a question that had no good answer. Walter had spent 9 years reading schedules like that one. He had built them, and he had sat across a table while other men found the error he had missed, and he knew exactly what that 11th minute felt like from the inside. He set the wastebasket down. He did not have access to her files, and would not have opened them if he had. What he did was carry the 2 pages and a pencil to the counter by the copy room and write in the margin in small block letters 3 figure appears duplicated from Q. 2. Check source tab. He did not sign it. He folded the pages once and left them centered on her keyboard where she could not miss them, and could not mistake them for something the printer had done on its own. At 6:50, he was in the freight elevator going down. Whatever happened in her office at 7:40 happened quietly. But at 8:30, Bernard watched Olivia Brooks come out of the elevator into the lobby, scan the floor once, and go back up. She did it twice more that morning. She never asked the front desk anything. She never asked Bernard. By the third time, he understood what she was doing, and he also understood that she was never going to say it out loud. "She's looking for you," he told Walter that afternoon. "She knows where I am at 5:30. That's not the kind of looking I mean. She's looking the way people look when they want to know if the answer is the one they're afraid of." Bernard leaned on the desk. "You want me to tell her?" "No." "Why not?" "Because then it becomes a favor," Walter said, picking up the cart handle. "And a favor has to be repaid, and she'd hate me for it. Let her keep the meeting. She earned the rest of it." Bernard looked at him for a moment longer than the answer required. 9 years, you said once. Reading numbers. I said a lot of things on a bucket at lunch. You said 9 years. Bernard let it sit. "I'm not asking. I'm telling you, I heard it." Walter pushed the cart toward the elevator. "Then you've got one more piece of information than anybody else in this building, and it hasn't done either of us any good." Bernard shook his head slowly. "You are a strange man, Walter." The Ridgeway Review went well. Walter heard about it sideways from the 2 women who worked 11 and took their break at the same hour he did. Ridgeway had extended. Olivia Brooks had run the room. There had been a bottle opened on 14 at 4 in the afternoon, and Gregory Simmons had made a toast. That was October. The holiday party was the 12th of December. Sterling Group held it in the lobby, the one night of the year the Marble did anything other than get walked on. They brought in tall tables and a bar along the north wall and strung lights up the columns, and the caterers came at 3. The cleaning staff worked at 2 because somebody has to keep the trash from overflowing and the floor from becoming a hazard. And the building manager put Walter on the 6 to 11 shift with a black polo instead of the gray one. I did not mind. He had been in that lobby at 5:30 in the morning for 6 months and had never once seen it full. There was something in watching 200 people laugh under lights hung over a floor he had waxed on his knees. By 9, the room was loud. Walter worked the perimeter with a bin liner, pulling napkins and empty glasses off the tall tables, moving in the space between clusters of people. The way service staff learned to move, which is to say, invisibly and at an angle. He came up on a group near the 3rd column. Gregory Simmons had his back to him, mid-story, one hand out. Olivia Brooks was on Gregory's left, with a glass she was not drinking from. And there were 6 or 7 others, most of them from 14 and 2 men. Walter did not recognize who had the look of clients. He reached between 2 of them for an abandoned glass on the table edge. "Careful," Gregory said, and turned. "Don't let him get too close to the coats." It got a laugh. Not a big one. Enough. Walter put the glass in the bin and moved to the next table. He had a rule about this, which was that the moment you respond, you have agreed to be in the conversation, and he had no intention of being in it. But Olivia had turned around by then, with a full glass and a flushed face, and the momentum of a woman who had run the biggest account of her year and had spent all evening being told so. "He's not going to say anything," she said. "He never says anything. That's the whole act." Somebody near her said her name lightly, the way people do when they are offering an exit. She did not take it. "No, I mean it. 6 months of walking around this building like some kind of monk." She gestured with the glass toward Walter, and the gesture pulled the attention of the tables on either side, and the volume in that whole section of the lobby dropped by half. "Do you know what he actually is? He's a broke janitor with a bucket. That's the entire thing. He empties the trash, and he stares at the floor, and everybody's decided he's some tragic figure. He doesn't belong at this party. He's here to carry the garbage out and then go home to whatever it is he goes home to. The word broke did the damage, not janitor. Janitor was true, and Walter had never once flinched at it. Broke was the one she chose, because she knew the way people always know exactly which of a man's facts is the one he would rather not have said in a room. Nobody laughed. That was somehow worse than if they had. 200 people in a lobby, and for 3 or 4 seconds, the only sound was the music. And Walter stood there, holding a bin liner half full of napkins, with the lit columns going up behind him. He looked at her and said nothing. Then he set the bin down against the wall, where it would not be a tripping hazard, and walked out through the service door beside the elevator bank, and the door shut behind him, with the soft pneumatic sound it always made. The bus took 38 minutes, and he did not look at his phone once. The apartment was cold because he kept the thermostat at 62 to hold the gas bill down. He stood in the kitchen with his coat still on. The envelopes were where he had left them Sunday in the 2 rows, and the row that could wait had gotten one longer. He had spent 6 months telling himself that it did not matter what a room decided about him, because the room was wrong, and the record was right. Standing in that kitchen, he could not make the sentence hold its shape. She had said broke, and 200 people had heard it, and none of them had been wrong. He was 46, and broke, and the sum total of a lifetime of choosing to be decent was a black polo shirt, and a bus pass, and a stack of paper on a counter. He hung the coat on the back of the chair, did not eat, and went to bed at 11:40, and lay in the dark, asking himself for the first time in years whether the whole thing had been vanity, whether patience was only cowardice that had learned to describe itself well. The answer did not come. He got up at 4:15 anyway. The reckoning came on the 19th of December. The Ridgeway extension went to the board for final sign-off that week, and somewhere in the packet, a figure did not tie. It was not the 3rd column. The 3rd column had been fixed. It was a downstream number built on the 3rd column before the fix in a file. Nobody had thought to rerun, and it landed on the 16th floor with a note attached asking whose desk it had come from. It had come from Olivia's. By 10 in the morning, she had been upstairs and back, and the 14th floor had the quality of air a building gets before weather. At 10:20, she came out of her office and walked to where the cleaning cart was parked outside the file room. "You," she said. "My office." Gregory Simmons was already in there, standing by the window with his arms folded, and the building manager, a heavy, tired man named Frank Doyle, came in behind them, looking like he would rather have been anywhere else. Olivia stayed on her feet behind the desk. "There's a document error in the Ridgeway packet, a serious one. The version that went upstairs was not the version that left this office." "That's not something I'd know about," Walter said. "You're in this office every morning before anyone else. You handle the printer bin. You have been in this room alone with paper for 6 months, and this is not the first conversation we've had about you and things that don't belong to you." She said it flatly, and she did not look at him. While she said it, she looked at the corner of her desk. "I want his access revoked, and I want him off this contract. Today." Frank Doyle shifted his weight. "Miss Brooks, he's contract staff. That's a call for, then make the call." Walter thought about the 2 folded pages, and the pencil, and the block letters he had written at 6 in the morning, so that she would not have to sit in a room and be found out at minute 11. He thought about how easily he could put that on the table right now, and what it would do to her face, and how permanent it would be. He had one clean shot, and he understood exactly what it was worth. "All right," he said. Gregory looked up surprised. Olivia's eyes came off the desk corner for the first time. "That's it, you're not going to say anything. I've said things in this office before." Walter took the building card out of his shirt pocket and set it on the desk, squared to the edge, the way he set everything down. I hope the truth comes out one day. That's all I've got. He put the gray shirt in his bag in the third-floor supply room and took nothing else, because there was nothing else. In the lobby, Bernard Pruitt looked at the bag and then at his face and did not ask. "They'll figure it out," Bernard said. Maybe. I was 5 steps from the revolving door when he saw the wallet. It was on the low bench by the north window, black leather worn at the corner. Sitting where a man sets a thing down while he takes a phone call and then walks away from it. Walter opened it far enough to see the license, Harold Whitfield. He could have walked out. There was a version of that day in which he walked out with it in his pocket, and every single thing that had happened to him that morning would have been a reason. He turned around and set it on the security desk. "Mr. Whitfield left this on the bench," he said. "Don't tell him who brought it." Bernard's hand came down on the wallet and stayed there. "Walter, don't. Not like this. Not on the way out the door." Then he went through the revolving doors onto the street, and the cold came up off the sidewalk, and behind him the lobby went on exactly as it had before. The unemployment claim was still in review 5 weeks later. Contract staff sit in a different queue, and every letter that came asked for one more document than the last. Walter spent January the way people spend it. He filled out applications at the warehouse off the interstate, at 2 distribution centers, at a hospital that needed overnight environmental services. The warehouse called back and asked why he had left his last position. He said the contract ended. The woman on the phone said in a pleasant voice that they would be in touch, and they were not in touch. He understood the mechanics. A gap is a question, and a man who cannot answer it in the first minute never gets to the second one. By the last week of the month, the 2 rows on the kitchen counter had collapsed into one. There was no longer a category for what could wait. He sat there on a Tuesday night with the overhead off and the lamp from the other room, throwing just enough light to read by, and went through the stack in one envelope at a time. And when he finished, he had $81 in checking and $1,300 due on the first. I did not do anything dramatic. He sat with his palms flat on the counter on either side of the paper and looked at the wall. And the thought arrived the way these thoughts arrive, quietly and fully formed, as though it had been waiting outside the door for 6 months for someone to let it in. He had gotten it wrong. The entire architecture of the man he had decided to be was a story he had told himself to make the losing feel like a choice. He had knelt on a marble floor to pick up a woman's papers and been told to get out of her sight, and he had called that dignity. He had sat on a carpet in the dark, putting 80 pages back in order for a meeting he was not invited to, and called that character. He had written 2 lines in pencil to save a person who despised him, said nothing when that same person put the failure on him, and handed back a wallet on his way out the door with instructions not to be named. And here was the total: $81 a shut-off notice, and a lobby across town where 200 people believed he had stolen something. Kindness, it turned out, was not a currency. It was a hobby, a thing a man could afford while something else paid the rent. And he had gone on practicing it long after he stopped being able to afford it the way people keep a car they can no longer insure. He turned the lamp off and sat in the dark a while longer. His phone rang at 9:50 in the morning on the 30th of January. The voice was a woman's, brisk and precise. She was calling from the office of the chairman of the board at Sterling Group, and she asked whether he could be at the building at 2 o'clock that afternoon. "If this is about the December situation," Walter said. "I gave the card back. I don't have anything of theirs." She said that was not what it was about, that the chairman had asked for him personally, and that she was not authorized to say more on the phone. 2 o'clock, Walter said. He owned one jacket that still fit correctly. He ironed a shirt on a towel on the kitchen counter because the board had gone somewhere. In one of the moves, took the bus and got off 2 stops early because he had arrived too fast and did not want to stand in that lobby for 30 minutes. On 16, the board of directors had been in session since 11. The chief executive's chair had been empty in everything but name since March. The search had run 10 months. 3 finalists in the fall, 2 of whom went elsewhere, and a third passed over in a vote that left the room in a bad temper for a week. Every man and woman at that table knew what the market says about a company that cannot fill its own top job. Harold Whitfield let them run out of things to say. He was 71, and he had learned a long time ago that a board will tell you what it is actually afraid of if you simply refuse to fill the silence for it. Then he asked his question. What actually makes an employee worth respecting? One director said performance. Another said judgment under pressure. A third said, half-joking, that all 3 finalists had been certified to have both, and look where it had gotten them. "I'd like you to hear something," Whitfield said, and looked toward the door. "Bernard, come in." Bernard Pruitt walked into that room in the uniform he had worn in that building for 19 years, stood at the end of the table with his hands at his sides, and did not sit down when he was offered a chair. "Mr. Whitfield asked me in the summer to tell him what I see," he said. "So here it is. 3 things. In July, Miss Brooks accused Walter Hayes of stealing her access card in front of half the 14th floor. He was carrying it face up in the flat of his hand, walking it down the corridor to her office. Denise at the front desk watched him do it. She's 24, and she wasn't going to say so, and I don't hold it against her. In October, he found an error in the Ridgeway schedule in the printer tray at 6 in the morning. He wrote it out in pencil in the margin unsigned and left it on Miss Brooks's keyboard. That meeting would have come apart in front of the client, and it did not. He told me not to tell her. I asked him why. He said that if she knew, it would be a favor, and a favor has to be paid back, and she'd hate him for it. On the 19th of December, she put that same document's failure on him and had him removed from the contract. He didn't say one word about the pencil. He set the card on her desk, said he hoped the truth came out one day, and left. On his way out of this building with his bag on his shoulder and nothing left to gain from any of us, he found your wallet on the bench by the north window, Mr. Whitfield. He brought it to my desk and told me not to say who found it. His voice did not change through any of it. 19 years I've watched people here. Everybody's decent when somebody's watching. That man was decent at 5:30 in the morning on an empty floor when the only person who would ever know was himself. That's all I came up to say. Whitfield thanked him, then took a sealed envelope from the folder in front of him and slid it to the director on his left. "Open it. Read the name." The seal broke. Inside was an evaluation record the search committee had opened on the 26th of June, and the name on it was Walter Hayes. He ran a firm of his own for 9 years, Whitfield said once they had the first page. It failed in a bad quarter for reasons that are in there, and he paid out his people before he paid himself, which is also in there. You were all given that history in June. Not one of you asked to meet him, because a man who has lost a company is a man who has already been filed. So I stopped asking about his history. I heard he had taken a maintenance contract in this building to keep his rent paid, and I left him exactly where he was. I wanted to know what he became when he had nothing left to trade with. Not in an interview. On a floor at 5:30 in the morning in front of people who had decided he was nothing. A director said carefully, that character was not the same thing as capability. No, Whitfield agreed. And if he had no capability, we would not be having this conversation. He built and ran a firm for 9 years, and he read a duplicated figure off a printer tray in the 4 seconds it takes most people to throw a page away. The capability is on the table in front of you, and we have tested for it 3 times before, and it did not save us. What we have never once been able to test is whether a person tells the truth when the truth is expensive. That one you only ever find out by accident. The vote took 4 minutes. Olivia Brooks was called up at 10 minutes to 2. The December failure was on her record, and she had spent a month building the argument, and she walked in with it in a folder and sat in the third chair from the door. Gregory Simmons came in behind her because his name was on the same distribution list, and he had assumed the meeting was about the account. At 2 o'clock, the doors opened, and Walter Hayes came in. I had not shaved that morning. He was carrying 6 weeks in his face that no jacket was going to cover, and he stopped in the doorway when the 9 directors got to their feet. Bernard was standing at the end of the table with his hands folded. Gregory had gone the color of paper. Olivia's folder slid off her lap and hit the carpet, and nobody picked it up. Whitfield came around the table. "Mr. Hayes, sit down. There's something in this room you have a right to hear." They read him the record. He listened all the way through without moving, and when they reached June, his jaw tightened once, and that was all. "You knew where I was," he said, "the whole time." "I did. You knew what was being done to me." "I knew," Whitfield said. "I could have ended it in an afternoon. I chose not to, and you are owed an apology for that, and you have it. I did not expect it to go as far as it went, and I did not enjoy watching any of it. What I won't do is pretend the answer wasn't worth having." Then he said the rest. The board of Sterling Group had that afternoon elected Walter Hayes, Chief Executive Officer, effective the 1st of February. The room applauded. Walter did not stand. Olivia got up instead. She stood in front of a board she had been brought upstairs to defend herself to, and in front of the man she had called a broke janitor, in front of 200 people, and whatever she had planned did not survive the first second of it. I looked at what he was wearing and where he was standing, and I decided that was all of him, she said. I did it in his first week, and I never revisited it. I told a floor full of people he was a thief, and his hand was open, and the card was face up, and I knew that while I was saying it. And the pages on my keyboard in October, I knew inside of 10 minutes who put them there. There was nobody else in that office at 6 in the morning. She made herself finish it. I knew, and I let it go, because knowing it meant becoming a different person than the one I'd been telling all of you was. I'm sorry. Not because of what's in this room. Because of what I did. Walter looked at her for a moment. He had thought on some of the worst nights that he would enjoy this. He did not. I believe you, he said. So I'll tell you the only thing I know about apologies. A sincere one isn't something you say to the person you hurt. It's already too late for me, and I'll be all right. The apology is what you do with the next person you decide has nothing to offer you. There will be one. There always is. That's where I'll find out whether you meant this. Gregory Simmons was still against the window, and Walter turned to him last. You did it in front of clients, and you never once did it on an empty floor. We'll talk about that on Amida. Gregory put in for a transfer that Thursday. It was not granted for 6 weeks, and he spent all 6 of them on the 14th floor. On the 1st of February, Walter Hayes came through the revolving doors of Sterling Group at 5:30 in the morning, because that was the hour his body had learned. The lobby was empty, and the marble was dark, and he stood in the middle of the floor for a long while. Bernard came on at 6, found him there, and said nothing which was the correct thing to say. The building learned his name inside a week. People who had walked past that gray uniform for 6 months without lifting their eyes now stood when he came into a room, and Walter noticed every one of them and never once mentioned it. He had not become worth respecting on the 30th of January. He had been the same man the night before on a stool in a cold kitchen with $81, and the only thing that had changed was that a room had finally looked. That is the whole of it. A person's worth was never in the work he did or the state of his bank account. And it was never in what a crowd in a lobby decided about him in the time it took to cross it. It was in what he was. It was when it cost him something to be it, when he was humiliated, when he was down to the last of it, when there was nobody watching and no version of the story in which anyone would ever find out. Never measure a man by how poor he looks. The one you overlook is often carrying more than anyone else in the room. Decency is never wasted, and the way a person treats those they believe are beneath them has always been the truest measure of exactly what they are.